Thank you, Lisa. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce what is now an old friend of mine, Bob Gaglione. He's going to conduct the fireside chat with the Honorable Congressman Issa. Bob is a 30-year lawyer. Bob was appointed to the as a Deputy Director of the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs of the U.S. Department of Labor in the last administration. And he's currently an arbitrator with the American Arbitration Association. More than that, Bob was a founding director of the San Diego Lawyers Chapter of the Federalist Society, which obviously we all hold dear in our hearts. Congressman Issa, Darrell Issa, represents the people in the 48th Congressional District of the United States House of Representatives. For those of you not from California, the 48th encompasses central and eastern portions of San Diego County and a portion of Riverside County. It happens to include the mountain and desert areas of the San Diego Imperial County border. And with that, I would ask Bob to come up and he will help us learn more about this public servant.
Are we facing the fire? I have yet to do a fireside chat where they actually had a fire.
We actually tried, but it didn't have an outlet up here. We had an electric one for you. Well, it is great to be here with all of you today at the magnificent Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. And it's a great honor and privilege to interview for this fireside chat without a fire, Congressman Darrell Issa. Our goal today is to talk a little bit about his past, a lot about the present, a little bit about the future, and there will be an opportunity, assuming time permits, for Q&A from the audience. So if you have a brief question in mind, start thinking about that right now. Let me first start by asking you, Congressman Issa, a little bit about your background. Tell us, if you would, where you were born, where you were raised, and about your early childhood.
Well, like Reagan, I adopted California. I was born and raised in Cleveland, served in the military, enlisted when I was 17, and it was an order I chose to happily obey when I got orders to come to California, and I was stationed based out of Fort Ord in Monterey. No longer there, but a great and wonderful base, and I served here for almost 4 years as a young officer in the Jimmy Carter Army. Left active duty just in time to be back in Cleveland when Ronald Reagan was elected, and then served in the reserves throughout his 8 years as president, and thoroughly enjoyed that a lot more than I did the 4 on active duty. Started a company in Ohio that grew, brought its headquarters back to California, where it grew more, and then got bit by the political bug. And as some of you, if you're old enough, remember, foolishly I thought I could run straight for the United States Senate from business, and I finished a close second in the primary, which was fortunate because it was when we discovered that Republicans were not electable statewide for all practical purposes. That year we lost the governor's race by 20 and the Senate race by 8. So actually our Senate candidate was fabulous. He only lost by 8. And we haven't had a U.S. Senator from my party since. But 2 years later, my congressman retired, and they said, hey, you know, you lost the state, but you won your district. And the rest is history.
I want to take you back in time a little bit. You were a very successful businessman, as many people know. What caused you to run for public office? It's always interesting to me that somebody who's so successful in a given space decides to throw themselves into the political arena.
Well, I'll do that as a little bit of a question to the audience. How many of you have ever given to a political candidate? Very good. Keep your hands up. I'm taking notes. How many of you have attended those events? About 2/3. See, those are the people that could fall into the trap that I fell into. I was okay when I was giving to candidates, but I made the mistake of going to events. and you get bit by it. You get bit by people saying, oh, you could run, and you'd make a great fill in the blank. These are not your friends, by the way, okay? But I got involved, and quite frankly, I really enjoyed. I testified before Congress on behalf of a bill now known as NAFTA, and just piece by piece. But what really got me into it is, to be honest, government regulation and the largest tax increase in American history at the time, which was retroactive by Bill Clinton. I vowed that if anyone could raise my taxes after the end of the year, then there was something wrong and I should be more involved in politics. So that's what took me down that dubious road to where I am today.
So being from Cleveland originally, the Guardians are coming to San Diego to play the Padres at Petco Park this week. Which team are you going to root for?
Well, if they'd call themselves the Indians again, I would root for the Indians. I actually, my late partner in Ohio, I was at his wake on the last time they actually had Indian memorabilia, and they had all that Guardian crap there. And it was amazing. Nobody was buying the new stuff. Everyone was buying the old stuff because the Cleveland Indians have such a legacy of a small city compared to New York and so on, playing their hearts out and playing better and with some incredibly famous players. So the answer is, as much as I'm a San Diegan, love it, I'll be there for my Cleveland guys. And my mom will be listening on the radio. I have to keep her with all the modern technology because she follows the Browns and the Indians every single game, every single year. She even has a flag she puts up in front of her home. And by the way, she's living in North County, San Diego.
I guess the bigger question for you Dodger fans in the audience is, will the Dodgers even lose a game this year? They look pretty good. All right, well, let's talk about some present issues. Some of the topics, there are so many we could delve into today. We've picked some, and hopefully the audience will have some questions on some others that perhaps we don't get to. Being in California, obviously we're a border state. Being from San Diego, border city, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about immigration, what's going on in Washington, D.C. with immigration right now, the deportation of, I think, the latest count I heard from Department of Homeland Security, I think we're over 30,000 people have been deported since the Trump administration took office in January. What's your take on what's going on with just overall with the immigration issue right now?
Well, it's it's the funniest thing in the world to find out that for 4 years under President Trump, we brought to basically a standstill net immigration, illegal immigration that is. Well, we continued to bring in about 1.4 million people legally every year. We then had 10 million or so, who knows the count? All the figures are probably understating how many people came here illegally or at the invitation of the Biden administration. And in 60 days, it was reversed. The answer is the president is following the laws passed by Republican and Democrat administration, the laws that people like Bill Clinton said it was his obligation to uphold and for which he more or less did during his tenure. So we've really just returned to what one would call lawfulness versus lawlessness, which is to say that the Biden administration used its executive authority to not use its executive authority properly.
And have you been hearing from your constituents in your district about the changes that have happened since January?
I am, and there's two groups I hear from. The one group that's delighted, and that includes minorities in underserved areas with high crime. The other group I'm hearing from are those who are unfortunately listening to the various media outlets and are personally afraid that somehow this is going to go too far, this is going to adversely affect them. And uncertainty is one of the things that we're having to deal with, that I'm not sure if it'll take another 90 days or another 4 years, but we've got to get back to the certainty that government does properly what is both constitutional and statutorily their responsibility. And, we're going to get into it here, I'm sure. We're in an uncertain time. Executive action has occurred. The president is being stopped in that executive action. It's going up on appeal. He's winning some, he's losing some. But one group will tell you that he's not doing enough and he should ignore the court. The other group would say that he's not going to obey the court. And I think both groups need to calm down and realize that testing the court is part of what the executive branch has done, will do, including all the way back in 1801 with Marbury. You don't know what you can or can't do until you test it. And so I think we're going to see that. We're going to see this administration test it and then abide by what the court ultimately says, but begrudgingly in some cases, but that's also part of our history of the executive branch.
One of the questions I've always wondered about is, with respect to immigration, why is it that Congress can't seem to pass a comprehensive immigration reform package? We've come close in recent years, and there's been a lot of discussion about it. But what is so challenging and difficult about immigration bills?
Well, first of all, neither side wants it. And so anyone who tells you we want a comprehensive immigration bill, no, they don't. They want what they want. And so there's a tug of war on which balance is very difficult, because what do you trade? Decades ago, Senator Kennedy traded the lottery system because he wanted to get 50,000 Irishmen to still be able to come in a system that the new system was not as friendly toward, if you will, established groups that had come here. And so we put the lottery in, and for the first couple of years, the Irish got the majority of it. Today, about 90% of the lottery plus really goes to sub-Saharan Africa. Well, that's not what Kennedy wanted, and he'd be coming up with a new deal if we did comprehensive. But the other part of it is comprehensive is a lie. The fact is, we have a system which is completely broken in many pieces, and each of those pieces need to be fixed. EB-5, which is supposed to be investment, raises very little money and for a short period of time, and it needs to, if it's going to provide immigration authority, it's going to need to do a better job of raising money, because we're a very good country to invest in. And if people say they want to come to invest, then why do they get to loan $800,000 for 5 years, get it all back, and bring in their whole family for life? H-1B is not an effective program. To be honest, a few companies in India dominate the slots on it. In fact, and they do so with wages that most of you in this room would say, this is the best and the brightest, this is the high tech. They're making $70,000 or $80,000. That's really what you make almost at minimum wage these days. So I could go through each one of these things, and you'd find that 1.4 million is filled with things that don't make any sense. By the way, the number one basis for people coming to the United States today is family reunification. But chain migration means that family reunification creates more family reunification slots. So much so that there are decades of backlogs of people who want to bring their siblings in. So do we need to fix the system? I'd love to. Should it be merit-based, in my opinion, so that the 1.4 million would be like the Australians and the Canadians, based on what's best for America primarily? And recognize that if there's 7 billion people in the world and 6 billion live in adverse poverty, there's no limit to the amount of people who'd like to come here. And if we have slots for 500,000, 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, any amount you want to name, it's still going to pale in comparison to the number of people who want to come here. So it's sort of like if you're hiring for your business and you find out that for 10 slots, you have 10,000 applicants. Would you pick the applicants by lottery, or would you look through and find the best you could find in that? Those are some of the many things that we are faced with, that the other side has an opinion, which is I'd like to have people that are going to vote their way come in. And you saw it with the Biden administration where they brought in people in mass that they hoped would stay and vote their way. They wanted to change the demographics of America. If that's half of the equation, with all due respect, how do you come to a compromise? Which is why the real compromise is, are we going to enforce the borders pursuant to the law or not? And if we do that, then will there be a pent-up demand for programs that provide certain categories of workers that we currently can't get enough of, and that drives a compromise, at least on that issue. Because I do believe we need a comprehensive guest worker program. I do believe we need reform, but we're not going to get it until we have a period of time of holding the borders to what the law says it is, and then having people on the outside pushing their politicians to make the compromises on some issues. Some of them aren't going to be solved anytime soon.
Well, let's talk about what I think is one of the biggest issues facing our country, which probably gets, until recently, not as much discussion as some of the other big issues, and that is the federal budget deficit. I'm curious what your take is on what the likelihood is that the efforts of DOGE and the current Trump administration will be eroding or chipping away at the deficit, and is there any chance we'll actually get back to a balanced budget in this country in our lifetime?
That last one's a great question. How many of you are old enough to remember, before the Bill Clinton largest tax increase in American history, what the previous largest tax increase in American history was? Maybe the youngster up front, do you have any idea? It was George H.W. Bush's Read My Lips. Because the majority party at that time, the Democrats, went out on a compromise junket to Andrews Air Force Base, and they met with the president, and they convinced him that the deficit was going to bankrupt America. That in fact, all the dreams and all the aspirations that we all had under Ronald Reagan were going to be quashed if we didn't deal with this deficit of, I don't know, 150 billion or whatever it was at the time. It was small. George H. broke his promise, broke the Reagan trust, and went from a flatter tax to a fatter tax, from a pretty much one level tax to another new level and a level beyond that. And he did so because he was so concerned with the deficit, something that Reagan had said we'll grow our way out of. And Art Laffer had said, you know, lower taxes will eventually give you the economy that allows you to do things you couldn't otherwise do. That was the beginning of the end of a balanced budget, because what happened was, the moment that money came in, there was an inexhaustible desire to stick it to the, quote, rich. And Bill Clinton did that. He vilified people and did another round. And we've been doing that game ever since, of vilifying the rich, trying to raise their taxes, while meantime coming up with all kinds of tax credits. If you were to do away with all tax credits, just doesn't matter what they are, all these things that cause you not to pay what the income tax level says you should pay, the deficit would go away. We actually collect enough on the front end before tax credits to take care of the back end. The problem is, you've got all these things that have been put in that cause, in some cases, people to pay no net taxes, even get more back than they pay in. So the system has become pretty corrupt. That's going to have to change, in addition to what DOGE is doing. But what DOGE is doing that no politician, and I put myself in that category, nobody has the guts to get up every day and say, we have to attack Medicare and Medicaid as you know it. We either have to raise the amount that we collect, or we have to lower the amount we pay out, because they're both bankrupt. Nobody's willing to say that publicly, at least not twice, because they're gone after the first time. And as a result, it takes something like DOGE to say, oh, here's actual theft going on. Here is misspending within Medicare and Medicaid that will cause people to at least reduce that amount. It'll be the only reduction in Medicare, Medicaid, and yes, Social Security for those over 115 years old could go away anytime soon. And those over 300, I'm sure they're already been cut back. And it'd be funny if it didn't actually happen, that thousands and thousands of people that the data said were older than the oldest living person have been getting the money. And people that have been 30 and 40 years living outside the country, the automatic transfers just keep going and nobody has done anything about it. So we can reduce the deficit by a considerable amount, but actually eliminating it is going to take a willingness to have a flatter, fairer tax, one that doesn't have a lot of back-end credits, and one that says when you make decisions in your personal lifestyle, it is your decision. And I'll just give you one example, and I know we're being filmed, so I do this at great peril. Under the first Trump tax cut, everyone focuses on the fact that the corporate tax rate went from 40-ish to 21. And that was supposed to be the tax cut for the rich and all that. Turns out that turns into distributions that go into people's 401ks. It's caused the market to rise. And by the way, it had a net positive revenue for the Treasury. But the other half, that $2 trillion tax cut, the other half was all about doubling the child tax credit for basically, child care. Now, nobody in the Republican Party that votes every day Republican even knows that. They all assume that the Democrats do all that. The fact is, we got no credit for it. It was $1 trillion, and it's the reason, if you're a Californian, well, if you're in any state, your SALT deduction went away, because the offset for doing that was raising the taxes on people because they couldn't deduct money that their state had already taken. So even in a Trump administration, and I worked for the man, I left Congress for 2 years to work in the Trump administration. I'm all in as a MAGA. But even in the Trump administration, we made the system less conducive to actually balancing the budget. So that's a long way of saying we got to stop doing the wrong things if we're actually going to get to a balanced budget.
Well, that's a great answer to a tough question. I appreciate it. Well, we have a room full of lawyers and judges, so we better talk a little bit about courts and some legal issues. Let me ask you first about an act that you have entered into Congress, the Judges Act, and we saw that in the last Congress as well. Could you tell us what the Judges Act is and what it hopes to do for us?
Well, it's a phoenix right now because it's rising from the ashes of having been one of the very few vetoes of the last administration. After the election, after it passed unanimously in the Senate and overwhelmingly on a bipartisan basis in the House, President Biden decided that since Trump would get the first group of judges, that he'd veto it. So it died. Now, the way we did this bill, and the way we're doing it again, is we spread over a decade the phase-in of 66 judges, which is about almost a 10% increase in the size of the court. And we did so deliberately so that no one president, no one Congress, not even two presidents or two Congresses would all get those appointments. And we thought that was fair, and it allowed Republicans and Democrats to come together and do it. Would we like to get 66 judges at one time? Probably. Was it doable politically? No. And it had been over 2 decades since we'd increased the size of the court. And as most of you that practice in federal court know, there's about 1,000 cases per judge right now at the district level. And so you do have to plead a lot out. You do have to settle a lot because there's no way that even a fraction of those could all get directly to the judges. So increasing by 10% won't fully solve the problem, but it will reduce the burden. We've reintroduced it. I have some very brave Democrats who have looked and said, I was for it last Congress, it's still fair, and they're co-sponsoring it. So we believe we'll get it out of the House with maybe not as many as we got last time, but we'd hope to get 20 or more Democrats to vote with Republicans, get it to the Senate where we have at least 3 Democrats that are on board, which gets us to 56. So in the arithmetic of the House and the Senate, we're within distance of, for the first time in more than 2 decades, expanding the court. California gets the largest single group of them, but it's phased in. Only 22 of the 66 would occur during the remainder of the Trump administration, and then only if they were confirmed, but that'd be the maximum new slots. And we think it's going to work. I'll give you one example where we're desperate to do it. Oklahoma, where Supreme Court decisions have created a backlog that it's so bad we're having to loan Oklahoma 2 judges just to keep up with the cases.
Interesting. We've also talked earlier today during this program before you arrived about nationwide injunctions, and that's become a big issue in America, a hot topic in the news. Why don't you tell us your thoughts on what's happening with the nationwide injunctions?
Well, next week, one of my bills will be voted on the floor. We'll have a hearing on Tuesday, and before we go home for the week, we will have passed a bill called NORA, No Rogue Judges Act. It will solve a portion of the problem. As most people, or probably everyone in this room knows, the Constitution calls for a court, a high court, a number to be determined by the Congress. Every other court is created by Congress. So in a sense, every district court judge is a statutory entity more than a constitutional entity. And when we created the district courts, we put in rules that made it very specific. A judge in a district can only consider one in which the plaintiff or the defendant has to have a nexus to the district. You have to have a legitimate reason to be in that district. And we intended, for the most part, to have the judge's decision limited to the plaintiffs and defendants before him. Now, they could exceed the district if the plaintiffs and defendants in a class action suit and so on exceeded it. So we don't want to change any of that. That's original intent of the statute. What we do want to do is eliminate the idea that just because you have an allegation by a plaintiff who may not even be the injured party, that you can in fact rule for the whole nation. And so that's what the NORA does. It will cut a portion of them in that a judge can rule, but a judge cannot do a nationwide injunction. And we believe that that will stem the activism of many. It will not eliminate all of them. And we don't expect that. We still have to deal with some foreign shopping. And to be honest, we're going to have to come back with a bill that when it's the executive branch, and particularly the president's direct orders, that there has to be an fast appeal to the high court. We cannot tolerate weeks or months when the executive branch is being stopped from doing something that is time sensitive. And so, there are times when it's not essential. The president would still have to plead that they wanted to take advantage of the accelerated appeal process. But each of those has to happen. But this week, I expect to pass overwhelmingly out of the House the NORA Act. So we will at least begin to send a message. And if I can take a moment of privilege here, this shouldn't be necessary. Chief Justice Roberts and the 8 others on the court have the ability to see a case in which a judge has exceeded that original intent of district decisions and slap them down not just on the merits of the case, but slap them down on whether or not they exceeded their mandate. And I would hope they would do it. So one of the things that I make clear is sometimes we pass legislation because it must be passed. Sometimes we pass it because the other branch hasn't done their job. This is that case. We should not have to be doing this because the court should, in fact, be able to somewhat discipline themselves. And we saw this in venue shopping for patents, first in East Texas and then West Texas. And anyone who does intellectual property knows those judges clearly, wrongfully were grabbing cases and were being known as the right place for a plaintiff to go. And it got to where a majority of all cases were in one judge's hands. That was unacceptable. But it took years and threats by the Congress for the court to begin finding cases and using them to right the wrong. We need that same sort of thing, and I say that because Chief Justice Roberts truly believes that he's preserving the court in everything he does. But you cannot preserve the court if you do not discipline the intention and the actions by the court, both at the High Court and all the derivative courts. And that's one of the challenges Judicial Conference and others should be facing as we speak.
Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about the economy. The president has been imposing an increasing number of tariffs and has talked about using tariffs more as a successful businessman and now a member of Congress. What are your thoughts on the use of tariffs and how the future economic outlook of America looks to you?
Well, first of all, you asked earlier about facing this deficit. The fact is that the previous 4 years, Joe Biden never saw a tariff he should get rid of because he liked the money. So the first thing is tariffs are taxes. They're not taxes directly, but they're indirect taxes, and they raise revenue. And government is addicted to revenue, so I don't expect every tariff to go away anytime soon, and I expect tariffs to be very difficult to get rid of little by little, even when they become, if you will, aged out. Having said that, when the president talks about reciprocal tariffs, it is so welcome by us in the Congress because for decades we've seen anomalies that make no sense. A BMW made in Germany comes to the United States for 3%, a little under 3% tariff. But it goes from South Carolina to Europe at over 15% plus a VAT being added of 20%. So clearly, they're in a position to export to us the same car at a lower price than we're in a position to export one back. It's assuming that the cost of making the car was identical. That doesn't make any good sense. And so when the president talks about reciprocal tariffs making sense, they are equalizing an unfair delta. When you look at revenue, those are irresistible, and I expect to continue to see them, and I don't expect the next administration to get rid of them. But there's an in-between, and the in-between is where I hope we get certainty soon. And I'll just give you 2 examples. Most of you know the term Five Eyes. Okay, these are the 5 countries that share intelligence at the highest level: Britain, Canada, the US, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, we're talking about a free trade agreement with Britain. We already have one with Canada. Australia and New Zealand are amazing countries. New Zealand has a maximum tariff of 3%. They basically are a tariff-free country. So putting a 25% tariff on lamb coming from New Zealand doesn't make a lot of sense. What is it we want from them? They're not sending us fentanyl. Illegal immigrants from New Zealand's an oxymoron because we kind of like Kiwis unless they come over to sail against us. And our trade balance is roughly equal. Australia, who represents a huge national defense asset, actually buys more from us than they sell to us. So we have a trade surplus with them. And again, they have virtually no, very, very small tariffs, so there's not a tariff imbalance. Those are 2 examples where when we sit with the president and when we sit with his advisors, we're trying to make sure that we look at those 3 buckets and provide certainty. If it's reciprocal, darn it, keep doing it until they come to the table and do bilateral reductions that make sense. If it's just about money on something where you're trying to build a domestic industry, like reinvigorating the chips, or for that matter, even as importantly, aluminum and steel, you're not going to create new aluminum and steel plants overnight, but you will cause investment if people see it as permanent. So permanent when you want to build an industry, reciprocal when they won't heal on unfair tariffs, and cut them as quickly as possible when they don't make any sense based on our current trade relationship. So I think that's what you're going to see. That's what we're talking about at Ways and Means, what we're talking about with the trade representatives, and particularly with the Secretary of Commerce.
We'll take a few questions from the audience in just a minute, but while I give some folks an opportunity to step up to the microphones, I did want to ask you, what challenges do you see us facing in the next 4 years, the remaining term with the Trump administration? What are the biggest challenges America faces?
For the Trump administration, they have to be able to do everything while being focused on those things that are important. And that's about the hardest job there is. President Trump is the hardest working president in our lifetime, bar none. Longest hours, fastest questions, most inquisitive mind, and able to bring people together like nobody else. And I've served since Bill Clinton in Congress. Yeah, you can applaud, absolutely. But focus on China is going to be critical. And And I'll give you an example. We're dismantling U.S. aid as we speak. $44 billion just in the direct aid, not including a myriad of other programs, and most of it being basically feel-good programs that get renewed and renewed and renewed. Within there are some important programs: water, clean drinking water in desperately needed areas, conflict resolution where there's true conflict and we're engaged. So there are things they're doing, and I don't want to eliminate that, and they have specifically turned those programs back on. But when you dismantle a program like USAID, and yet you're still competing against China's Belt and Road, and between the bribes they do and the money they send at developing nations, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, we have been losing for a long time. When I left Congress for 2 years, I was designated as the head of the Trade Development Agency. And so I traveled around the world to developing countries, and I looked at all of our programs. And what I discovered was we had no focus. We had no focus on if we wanted to change how things were going in a country. Pick any one, like Guyana. It doesn't matter. You can pick one. We didn't have a program. And by the way, when I arrived, we were still giving aid to China as a developing nation. You can't make these things up. We closed that office very quickly. But the lack of focus in every administration is a problem. In this one, it's going to be a huge problem because we have to focus militarily and economically, and from a standpoint of the cyber threat, the AI threat, and the espionage threat on China and some others to a lesser extent, if we're going to preserve our way of life. And we have to do that while getting our house in order, which is that $2 trillion challenge that you see throughout government. So throughout government, you've got to do everything, but the president has to get up every morning and say, I'm meeting with my national security team, I'm meeting with my commerce team for purposes of how are we doing on our confronting China. So no president's going to have to work harder. That's fine, he does that. But you're going to have to do both wide and narrow at the same time, and it's going to be quite a trick.
Thank you. We'll go to the audience. Can you tell us your name and your question, please?
Hi, my name is Heather Murray. I live in San Diego. And I was wondering, the Tijuana River has been polluting the beaches and the water in and around San Diego for more than decades now. I was just wondering if you have an opinion as to how we find a solution for that.
Well, I could say it stinks, but you already know that part. Look, all the way back for us San Diegans, when Brian Bilbray was a mayor before he became a county supervisor and then a congressman for many years, more than 40 years, the Tijuana River has simply been filled with the runoff from toilets in Tijuana. And it's only gotten worse, so much so that we've had more than 1,000 days in which our beaches have been closed. The federal government has entered into contracts, first NAFTA and then USMCA, that call on the Mexican government to do the right thing and meet their requirement, and for which we have also pledged money. We've delivered the money. they have not delivered the cleaning up. As a matter of fact, just the opposite. Mexico, I can't speak for all of Mexico, but Tijuana, they have one system. They don't separate their rain runoff from their sewer system. And as a result, their system is always overcrowded, but when it rains, it's particularly bad. On top of that, they don't do maintenance, and so periodically pumps shut down and you get raw sewage. The answer, unfortunately, is not the money, it's not the agreements, it's going to be the hard fight where we include the American River and the Tijuana River. Those are just two of them that are particularly a problem with Mexico. That Mexico has to do its job, or we're going to punish them punitively. And that means that it's going to be tough on cross-border business. It's going to be tough on the tariff. But the deadliness of sewage is not fentanyl, but it is a first cousin to fentanyl, and we've got to treat it that way. That it's got to be one of the agreements that, because in the last go-round of USMCA, we entered into an agreement, 4 years went by, and nothing has happened. So I know that's, to everyone else, maybe not the specific issue, but it's an example where we enter into trade agreements, and then one side doesn't keep the agreement, and there's no ramification for it. Under this president, I think there will be.
Well, thank you, Heather, for that question. I think we have time for one more. Go ahead. Please tell us your name first.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Sue Blake, and I am from Sacramento, California. Not quite one of your constituents, but I greatly appreciate all the work you do in Congress. My question is...
There's only 8 Republicans in the whole state. We all have to cover a big area. I'll take Sacramento.
Thank you. We need you. My question is dealing with the federal budget. I know a lot of conservatives and fiscally responsible individuals have been waiting for a real budget, and we're tired of the continuing resolutions that just kind of kick the can down the road. Can you tell us, when is Congress going to do a real budget and stop doing all these continuing resolutions that just waste money unconstitutionally?
Well, I will tell you, I was in Congress under George W. Bush when we actually did 12 bills and sent them to the Senate and got some of them back. That was the last time we did 12 separate appropriations bills and the Senate did anything back. So, the old expression that, the Democrats are your adversary, but the Senate is the enemy. We have a problem that seems to have just grown in the Senate. They have an attitude that sending back individual bills is simply not one of the jobs, because they like the idea that they throw all their pork in at the end, that they have the control. The House did 12 and then 10 and then 8, but even in the last Congress, we did, I think, 6 that we voted out of the House, half of them, which was more like 80% of the total spending. We sent over individual bills to the Senate. None came back. So as a House member, what I'd say is, yes, under Speaker Johnson, our goal this time is to put all 12 bills up to a vote and get them over to the Senate, because I think that's the right thing to do. And we're going to do as many as we can, hopefully all of them. But we will be back to CRs and omnibuses unless the Senate is held to a level of accountability, because we did our half. There's not anything more the House can do if they literally never get individual bills back, or even groups of them back from the Senate. Last Congress, the Senate sent us back 0. The one before, they sent us back 0. So I don't know what more we can do. Now, that's not to be defensive. I think we're going to keep sending them, and we should be the adults, even when the Senate always pretends that they're the adults, because when it comes to spending, they are the children with their earmarks. Yes, sir.
Yes, on the subject of the nationwide injunctions, here in California, in the California state court system, we have something called a peremptory strike against a judge, meaning that if you as a litigant feel that a particular judge to whom you've been assigned is hopelessly biased toward you, you can excuse that judge from hearing your case in the same way that you would excuse a juror in a peremptory strike. Is that something that Congress would consider as part of a package of judicial reform to do something about the proliferation of lawless injunctions?
Not only is it, but there's been a couple of bills over the years that dabbled with that might, as head of the courts, we've been looking at, because you're exactly right. The idea of a peremptory challenge when there has been a history, which would include a related case, which could predetermine the outcome. Because most of the time, that's where you really get the evidence in federal court, is a judge has already shown an outcome that they've determined, and as a result, they're not going to consider the next case de novo. They're going to come in with their prejudice, and just as you wouldn't have the same jury in a retrial that you had in the first one, you shouldn't have the same judge. So there have been a couple of them. Right now, there isn't a current bill, and part of the reason is we're trying to figure out whether or not some of this could be done, because some districts or some circuits have local rules that prevent even a random assignment from being overly random. And there are times when you actually would prefer that you get low numbered to somebody who has experience. In the case that you're talking about, where someone's granted a nationwide injunction, the reality is that one's up on appeal. They should be barred from taking another similar case. That simply, until that one is fully resolved, pick somebody else.
Well, just to follow up on that, I think I was addressing the more general problem where you have judge shopping. You have people going into districts that may or may not have much connection with the litigation. They're filing lawsuits in multiple districts. They wait and see what judges get assigned to their cases, and then they dismiss all the other ones with the judges that they don't like. It seems to me that one way to counteract that would simply be to have a blanket rule that says any party can, for any reason, excuse one judge from hearing a case.
Thank you for your question.
As a defense attorney, I would say that sounds like a great idea. However, we could see where that would be manipulated the other way. You did make a great point, and it's one that I'll take back with me, and that is the multiple filing prejudice. The fact is, if an organization or group do multiple filings, the burden or the right of picking the venue should actually go to the defendant. That if you file in 8 places, the defendant should pick which judge got assigned that they want to have, not the other way around. And that could dissuade the multiple filing that does let them basically judge shop separate from venue shop.
Thank you, Congressman. I actually think that's a great idea.
Thank you. And before we close, we're just about out of time.
I think the fire's going out.
Yeah. I was going to ask you if you had any final thoughts for us.
There's just one for all of us as Federalists to ask ourselves. Marbury said basically that the court would be the sole arbitrator of whether or not something was constitutional or even what a statute meant. And since 1803, that case has sort of been the basis for the court's real power. Marbury-Madison, exactly. Everyone learns it, and everyone assumes it's a postulate. Okay, but we all thought that Chevron deference was a postulate too, until it wasn't. One of the great questions is it time to look and say, you know what? The fact is, the other bodies cannot be co-equals if, in fact, the court finds itself with the ultimate say that is not infallible. So one of the questions is, should we rein in some portion of that? For example, and I'll just close with this, it's not a question of whether or not a court can rule, but how long can they rule? Can you rule on something that has been the law of the land for over 200 years? That law that is currently keeping the president from deporting non-citizens who are members of a terrorist organization as enemy combatants found on the battlefield, effectively, that law predates Marbury. Okay, they had their chance. They've had many chances. We've had wars. We have brought people into this country and then moved them out. We actually brought prisoners of war in, and at the end of the war, we said, not only are you going, but you're going now to prisoners of war from Italy and Germany and so on. This is not the first time a president has used that, and yet it is the first time it's being challenged. So I think that just as Chevron has been dramatically reduced or eliminated, and some of its derivatives, and just as many of us look at, for example, the Massachusetts EPA decision and say, oh, if we could just do it over again, we wouldn't have to breathe so heavily over the CO2 that's destroying our planet. Okay, because obviously the original intent of the EPA was to stop CO2. Now, I know I'm a little tongue-in-cheek at the close here, but I've been drinking iced tea. As Federalists, we should never say that anything is a postulate. We should be willing, just as our founding fathers did, to write what we believe we intended, to write it in a way in which the next generation can look at what we wrote and what we said and what it meant at that time, and make real independent decisions. The statute was not struck down for 200 years, and it is clear what it meant and what the president is doing. So I don't know how that case is going to be resolved by the High Court. But I would say for all of us, we should say, every chance we get, the only postulate that we can work with is our individual right to evaluate and to make a decision for ourselves and then fight for what we believe was agreed to, no matter how long ago. And that, I think, is what separates us from people on the other side of the political spectrum in many cases. And I want to thank you.
Excellent comments. Please join me in thanking Congressman Darrell Issa.